Chapter 7 The Sorting Hat. The door swung open at once, and a tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robe stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. "First years, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take it from here." She pulled the door wide open. The entrance hall was so big that you could fit a whole lot of Dursleys in it, house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like those at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out. The magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagstone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from the doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here, but Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small, empty chamber of a hall. They crowded in, standing rather close together, and than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of the term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the great hall, you must be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because you are here. Your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house in the common room. The four houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will take credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest all of you smarten up yourselves up as much as you can while you're waiting." Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and Ron's smudged nose, and Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "I shall return when we are ready for you," said Professor McGonagall. "Please wait quietly." She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. "How exactly do they sort us into houses?" he asked Ron. "Oh, some sort of test, I think," Fred said. "It hurts a lot, but I think he was joking." Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test? In front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would they have to do? He hadn't expected something like this the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw everyone else look terrified too. No one was talking much except Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she learned and wondering which one she'd need. Harry tried not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous, not even when he had taken the school report home to the Dursleys saying that he had somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall will be coming back through to lead him to his doom. Then something happened that made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed. "What the?" he gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just streamed through the back of the wall. Pearly white, slightly transparent, they glided across the room, talking one to another, hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. One looked like a fat little monk, saying, "Forgive and forget, I say. We all ought to give a second chance. My dear Friar, haven't we have enough of Peeves? All the chances he deserves. He gives us all a bad name, and you know he is not really even a ghost. I say, what are we doing here?" A ghost wearing a ruff and tights suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. "New students?" said the fat friar, smiling around at them. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few people nodded mutely. Oh, hope to see you in Hufflepuff, said the friar. Oh, my old house, you know. Move along now, said the sharp voice. Sorting ceremony is about to start. Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts floated away over the opposite wall. Now, form a line, said Professor McGonagall, told the first years, and follow me. Feeling oddly as though his legs turned to lead, Harry got in line behind a boy which had sandy hair, Ron behind him, and they walked to the chamber, back to the hall, and through a pair of double doors in the great hall. Harry had never imagined such a strange, splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles, floating in the mid-air over the long tables. There were the rest of the students. They were sitting. The tables were laid with glittering gold plates and goblets. At the top of the hall, another long table where the teachers were sitting, Professor McGonagall led the first years up here to where they came to the halt in a line facing the other students, with the teachers behind them, the hundreds of their faces starting to look at them like pale lanterns in flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone mighty, misty silver. Mainly to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upward and saw the velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look at the sky outside. I read it in Hogwarts history." It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there at all, and that there was a great hall. Didn't simply opened up to the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again at Professor McGonagall, silently placed his four-legged stool in front of the first years. On top, silently stood the stool, and she pointed to the wizard hat. The hat was patched and frayed. It extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Maybe they had to try and get a rabbit out of it? Harry thought, wildly, seeming sort of thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared too. For a few seconds there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A tip near the brim opened its mouth wide, and it began to sing. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge me by what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your ballers black, you can top hats sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head that sorting hat can't see, so try me on, and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong to Gryffindor, and well and brave in heart. Their daring, nerve, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong to Hufflepuff, where they're just as loyal and legal, or just and loyal. The patient Hufflepuff are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you're really in mind, where those of wit of learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps it is in Slytherin you'll make your real friends, the cunning folk, and of any means to achieve to their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm the thinking cap. The whole hall burst into applause. And the hat finished the song. It bowed at each of the four tables and became quite still again. So we've just got to put the hat on? Ron whispered to Harry. I'll kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll. Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on that hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he didn't wish they could have tried it on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-hearted or any of the things in this comment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, long troll parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit and be sorted, said Albert Hannah, a pink-faced girl with a blonde pigtail, stumbled out of the line and put the hat on, which fell right down over her eyes. She sat down a moment, paused. Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat. The table came to the right. The table to the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. Bones, Susan! Hufflepuff! Shouted again, and Susan scuttled off with Hannah. Boot, Teddy, Ravenclaw! The table second to the left clapped. This time, several Ravenclaws stood up to shake the hands of Terry as he joined. Brooklehurst Mandy went to Ravenclaw too. Brown Lavender became the first Gryffindor, and the table at far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see that Ron's twin brother was calling. Bulstrode Millicent became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination, but after he heard all the Slytherin, he thought they all looked like an unpleasant lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during in his old school. He had always been last to be chosen, but not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think he liked them. Flinch, Fletchery, Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes Harry noticed that the hat shouted out the name at once, but others it took a while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry, in line, and on that stool for almost a whole minute before they declared him Gryffindor. Granger, Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool, jammed the hat on eagerly. On her head, Gryffindor! Shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry. Oh, as horrible thoughts as always do when you're nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he was just sat there and the hat over his eyes for ages until perhaps Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and that he'd better go back on the train. When Neville Longbottom sat down, the boy who kept losing his toad was called. He fell over on his way on the stool, and he took the hat long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted, Gryffindor! Neville ran off, still wearing it, and had to jog back amid the gales of laughter and give it back. McDougal Morag! Malfoy swaggered up when his name was called, and got with which at once he barely touched his head and screamed, Slytherin! Malfoy went to his friends Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There wasn't many people left now. Moon, Knots, Parkinson's, and then the twins, Pearl and Patil, and Perks and Sally Ann, and then, at last, Potter Harry. As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out. Little hissings from all over the hall. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before he dropped the hat over his eyes was a full hall of people craning to get a look to see him. Next second, he was looking in the black inside of the hat. He wanted, a small voice said in his ear. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not as a bad mind, either. There's talent, oh, my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. How interesting. So where shall I put you? Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, hey? Said the small voice. Are you sure? You'd be great, you know. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. No doubt about that. No? Well, if not, if you're sure about that, then it better be Gryffindor! Harry's head heard the hat shout the last word to be the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to not have been put in Slytherin. He hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheer yet. Percy, the prefect, got up and shook his hand vigorously, while Weasley and the twins, We got Potter! We got Potter! Harry sat down opposite the ghost with the whose ruff he'd seen earlier. The ghost parted his arm and gave Harry a sudden horrible feeling. He just plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now, and at the end of the nearest him he saw Hagrid, who caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. Harry grinned back. And there, in the center of the high table, in a large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card that he had gotten in the Chocolate Frog. On the train, Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that shone brightly as the ghost's. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, nervous young man from the Leaky Cauldron. He also was looking very peculiar, at this with a large purple turban. And now there was only 4 people left. Thomas Dean, a black boy, even taller than Ron, joined Harry at the Gryffindor table. Turpin Lisa became a Ravenclaw, and then it was Ron's turn, and he was pale by now. Ron crossed his fingers, and the seconds later, the hat shouted, Gryffindor! Harry clapped loudly with the Ron and collapsed into the chair next to him. Well done, Ron. Excellent, said Percy Weasley pompously across to Harry. Zabini Blaze was made a Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll, took the sorting hat away. Harry looked down at the empty gold plate. He had just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin pasties were it seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms open wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. Welcome, he said. Welcome to New Year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words, and here they are. Nitwit, blubber, ornament, tweak. Thank you. And he sat back down. Everybody clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. Is he a bit mad? He asked Percy uncertainly. Mad? Said Percy airily. He's a genius, best wizard in the world. But he is a bit mad, yes. Potatoes, Harry. Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of them were now piled with food. He had never even seen so many things he liked next to one on a table: roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausage, bacon, steak, boiled potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some reason, peppermint humbugs. The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything except the peppermints, and began to eat it all. It was so delicious. That does look good, said a ghost, Ruff sadly watching. Harry cut up his steak. Can't you? I haven't eaten in nearly 500 years, said the ghost. I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I do think I've introduced myself. I'm Sir Nicholas de Mingsby Porpinigan, at your service, resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower. I know who you are, Ron said suddenly. My brothers told me you're nearly headless Nick. I would prefer you call me Sir Nicholas de Mimsy, the ghost began to say stiffly, but sandy-haired Seamus Finnegan interrupted. Nearly headless, Nick? How can you be nearly headless? Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, and if their little chat wasn't going all the way he wanted. Like this, he said irritably. He seized his left ear and pulled. Whole thing swung off at his neck and fell to his shoulder, as if it was on a hinge. Someone had obviously tried to behead him, but not done properly. So, looking pleased, with him stunned looks on their faces, nearly headless Nick flipped his head back into his neck, coughed, and said, "So, new Gryffindors, I hope you're going to help us with the house championship this year. Gryffindor has never gone so long without winning. Slytherins have got the cup 6 years in a row. Bloody Baron's becoming quite unbeatable. He's a Slytherin ghost. Unbearable." Harry looked over at Slytherin table and saw a horrible ghost sitting there with blank staring eyes and a gaunt face and a robe stained with silver blood. He was right next to Malfoy, who Harry was pleased to see didn't look too pleased with the seating arrangements. How did he get out all covered in blood? Asked Seamus, in great interest. I've never asked, said nearly headless Nick delicately. When everyone was eaten and they could remain, the food faded from their plates. leaving them sparkling clean as before. Moments later, desserts appeared, blocks of ice cream, every flavor you could imagine, apple pies, ter- treacle treat tarts, chocolate eclairs, jam donuts, trifles, strawberries, jello, rice pudding. Harry helped himself to a treacle tart and talked in turn to the families. I'm a half and half, said Seamus. Me dad, a muggle, Mom didn't tell him that she was a witch until after they were married. Bit of a nasty shock for him. The whole others laughed. What about you, Neville? Said Ron. Well, my gran brought me up, and she's a witch, said Neville. But the families thought I was all muggle for ages. My great uncle Algie kept trying to catch me off guard and forced me to do some magic out of me. He pushed me off the end of a black pier once. I nearly drowned, but nothing happened until I was 8. Great Uncle Algie came around for dinner, and he was hanging me out of the upstairs window by my ankles when my great aunt Enid offered him a meeting, and he accidentally let go. But I bounced all the way down to the garden and into the road. They all were really pleased. Gran was crying, she was so happy. And you should have seen their faces when I got in here. They thought I might be magic, not be magic enough to come. You see, Great Uncle Algie was so pleased he bought me my toad. On Harry's other side, Percy Weasley and Hermione were talking about lessons. I do hope they start right away. There's so much to learn. I'm particularly interested in the transfiguration, you know. Turning something into something else. Of course, it's supposed to be very difficult. You'll be starting small, just matches into needles, that sort of thing. Harry, who was starting to feel warm and sleepy, looked up at the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quirrell with absurd turban was talking to a teacher with a greasy black hair that hooked nose and sallow skin. It happened very suddenly. The hook-nosed teacher looked past Quirrell's turban straight into Harry's eyes, and a sharp, hot pain shot across the scar on Harry's forehead. Ouch! Harry clapped his hand to his head. What is it? Asked Percy. Nothing. The pain had gone quickly as it come. Harder to shake off was the feeling that Harry had gotten from the teacher's look, a feeling that he didn't like Harry at all. Who's the teacher talking to Professor Quirrell? Asked Percy. Oh, you know Quirrell already, do you? No wonder he's looking so nervous. That's Professor Snape. He teaches potions, but he doesn't want to. Everybody knows he's after Quirrell's job. Knows an awful lot about the dark arts, Snape. Henry watched Snape for a while, but Snape didn't look at him again. At last, as those two disappeared and Professor Dumbledore got to his feet, and the hall fell silent. Just a few more words. Now that we're all fed and watered, I have a few short or start of the term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils, and a few older students should do as well to remember that as well. Dumbledore's twinkling eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins. I have also been asked to tell by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you that no magic should be used between classes or in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should connect with Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year the third floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds for everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry laughed, but he was only one of the few who did. He's not serious, muttered to Percy. Must be, Percy said, frowning at Dumbledore. It's odd, because he usually gives us a reason and why we're not allowed to go somewhere. A forest full of dangerous beasts, everyone knows that. I do not know what he might have told us, the prefix at least. And now, before we go to bed, let's sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed the other teachers' smiles had become rather fixed. Dumbledore gave his wand a flick, and he was trying to get the fly off, like he was trying to get a fly off a long golden ribbon. It flew out of it, which rose higher and higher as the table itself, snake-like into words. Everyone picked their favorite tune, said Dumbledore, and off we go. And the school bellowed, Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy Waddy Hogwarts. Teach us something, please, whether we be old or bald, or young or with scabby knees. Our heads could do with filling with some interesting stuff. For now, they're bare and full of air, dead flies, and big bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back what we've forgot. Just do our best. We'll do the rest, and learn until our brains all rot. Everyone finished the song at different times. At last only the Weasley twins were left singing very slow funeral march. Dumbledore conducted the last few lines of his wand, and then he finished. He was one of those who clapped the loudest. Oh, music, he said, wiping his eyes. Magical beyond all we do here. Now, it's bedtime. Off you go. The Gryffindor first years followed Percy through the chattering crowds, out to the great hall and up to the marble staircase. Harry's legs were like lead again, but only because he was so tired and full of food. He was so sleepy even to be surprised that the people in the portraits along the corridors whispered and pointed as they passed, or that twice Percy led them through the doorways, hiding sliding panels and hanging tapestries. They climbed more staircases, yawning and dragging their feet, and Harry was wondering how much farther they had to go before they came into the sudden halt. A bundle of walking sticks floating in mid-air ahead of them, and as Percy took a step toward them, he stared them down, showing themselves at him. Peeves, Percy whispered to the first years. A poltergeist. He raised his voice. Peeves, show yourself. A loud, rude sound came from the air, letting out a balloon, as answered, Do you want me to go to the Bloody Baron? There was a pop, and a little man, and a wicked dark eyes and wide mouth appeared floating cross-legged in the air, clutching his sticks. Oh, he said with an evil cackle. Ickle firsties! What fun! He swooped suddenly down at them, and they all ducked. Go away, Peeves, or I'll Baron you'll hear about this. I mean it, barked Percy. Peeves struck out his tongue and vanished, dropping walking sticks on Neville's head, and heard them zooming away, rattling coats of armor as he passed. You want to watch out for Peeves, said Percy, as they set off. Bloody Baron's the only one who can control him. He won't even listen to the prefects. Here we are. At the very end of the corridor hung a portrait of a very fat woman in a pink silk dress. Password, she said. Caput Draconis, said Percy, and the portrait swung open forward to reveal a round hole in the wall. They all scrambled through it. Neville needed a leg up and found themselves in Gryffindor Common Room, a cozy, round room full of squishy armchairs. Percy directed the girls through the door into the dormitory, and the boys through another, and at the top of the spiral staircase they were obviously in one of the towers. They found themselves their beds, and at last 5 four-poster hung with deep red velvet curtains. Their trunks had already been brought up. Too tired to talk much, they pulled out the pajamas and fell into bed. Great food, isn't it? Ron muttered to Harry through his hanging. Oh, get off, Scabbers! He's chewing my sheets. Harry was going to ask Ron if he'd had any of the treacle tarts, but he fell asleep almost at once. Perhaps Harry had eaten a bit too much, because he had a very strange dream. He was wearing Professor Quirrell's turban, which kept talking to him, telling him he must transfer to Slytherin at once, because it was his destiny. Harry told the turban he didn't want to be a Slytherin, and it got heavier and heavier. He tried to pull it off, but painfully. There was Malfoy laughing at him and struggled with it. Then Malfoy turned into the hook-nosed teacher Snape, who laughed, became high and cold. There was a burst of green light, and Harry woke, sweating and shaking. He rolled over and fell asleep again, and there he woke the next day. He didn't remember the dream at all.